Summercourt. The blood droplet beaded on the ceiling, above the rotten doors. It lingered, clotted and sagging, before falling to the flagstone. How had it gotten up there? Wondered Grand Justice Gormain. How did blood get everywhere in this wretched place? Of course, Gormain's own vile form answered that question. Hairless and pallid, eyes sunken and teeth like talons. Truly an exemplar of the vampiric aristocracy. He was an aberrant, a beastly scion of poisoned genealogy. Except Gormain was no beast. Alone of his kind, total chivalric lunacy eluded him. Flashes of cursed sanity rendered stark the horror of his existence, even as they preserved his faculties. Hence the Summer King, dribbling out the command that Gormain would serve as his lawkeeper. What an honour, to be attended by gurgling yeomen, and hear the grievances of cannibals, clad in severed hands and a periwig of slick intestines. Gore dripped down his brow. He licked at it idly. One could not persist in New Summercourt without partaking. One had to conform with the king's crazed sycophants, or else stoke their suspicions and become their meal, even if you were not mad, like Gormain. "Loathsome," he muttered, glancing at what at first looked like a hound nibbling a bone. By the time he focused, the half-dead rat was already darting away. "Deliberating with the castle vermin, Grand Justice." Clad in deathly finery, Sekhar walked with stately dignity, flanked by handmaidens who carried serpentine knives and wide-bellied amphorae. The vampire's diplomatic expression was porcelain, but the sneer was in her eyes. Gormain supposed he would have acted the same, if confronted with himself. "Alas, my lady, 'tis the only engaging discourse one finds in these climes." "You surprise me, Gormain," Sekhar said. Being forced to entertain the ghoul's delusions had sharpened her bladed tongue, and the more lucid Grand Justice was apparently the outlet for her contempt. "Why, I see scarce difference between the Blood Court and this hovel." "Yet here thou art," Gormain said. "Neferata must think highly of thee to grant such an illustrious posting." "At least Queen Neferata is capable of thought," Sekhar chuckled. Snarling, Gormain let his gaze fall upon the slithering entity at Sekhar's side. The bloated serpent stared back. Sekhar smirked, pale fingers dancing along the hissing beast's brow. "You really must make peace with Obereth. You two have such commonalities. Table manners, for one." "Indeed, and 'tis heartening that thou hast a companion of similarly venomous character." "Don't be churlish," Sekhar cooed. "The great necromancer granted him to me, a godly gift." Her gaze narrowed to the sealed portal before them. "He is within." "As ever." On cue, the door shook to baritone howls. Sekhar tutted. "Let us proceed, then." The doors groaned as they were pushed open. Wood and rust shaking free, light washed over Gormain as howls turned to seraphic choirs. His steps echoed off marble polished to a mirror sheen. Looking down, Gormain beheld his reflection. Ruddy of pallor, robust of physique, he lifted his gaze past tapestries woven from gilded cloth towards the source of the blessed light. It shone from the far end of the chamber. Surrounded by floral garlands, the Summer King's ermine robe seemed to barely contain his divinity. Councillors clustered and whispered around him, yet Usheran's radiant smile seemed reserved for his Grand Justice alone. Gormain felt the urge to weep, to kneel, and recant every boorish doubt. "Focus, fool!" Sekhar hissed. No, this was a madman's illusion, and Gormain was not mad. He willed himself to see. Where once had been light, darkness now filled the hall. The tapestries were scraps of bloodied flesh, the garlands were corpses, offal and blood carpeted cracked stone, and the king. Usheran was an abomination. Any hint of regality gruesomely stretched over a body bulging with foulness. Here was the curse of the aberrants made flesh, the viated font they had unwillingly supped from. The king remained imposing, no doubt. Strength bubbled from within his twisted form, and his filthy claws were long and wicked. A pulse of necromantic energies radiated from him, sending the head soon into his cloak moaning. He could be supreme amongst the Mortarchs in might and majesty, if only he had mastery of himself. Instead, Usheran squatted in these dilapidated halls, drooling and screeching while thinking himself noble. It was frustrating. It was embarrassing. "Beloved Gormain," Usheran rumbled, shifting upon his osseous throne. "Thou hast quarters reminiscing with Chancellor Gristlestick." Gormain glanced at one of the severed heads that hung from Usheran's mantle, locked in a scream. "As you say, my liege." "No doubt your wisdom speaks for itself, Lord of Summer," Sekar interjected. The mesmeric fluidity to her bow served to realign Usheran's wandering attentions. "Hail, niece," he crooned, as if he had not seen Sekar for decades, rather than days. "Our sister in darkness keeps thee among us, eh?" "Be assured, Lord, that Queen Neferata is well informed of your hospitality," Sekar said, without a hint of irony, "as of your munificence to would-be allies." Usheran said. A slick tongue lashed at his fangs. "So, 'tis that time. Verily, let it never be said we are miserly with our boons. Come, come," he bid. "Proceed with ransacking our cellars." Bearing a practised smile, Sekar nodded, sending her disciples to ascend Usheran's dais. Gormain watched them make slick cuts across his royal flesh. Golden nectar, no. Usheran's rancid ichor seeped into the amphore. This was the Nulhamian scheme, claiming to be distributing his fabled wine to deserving souls. Sekar and her brood leached Usheran's blood. These offerings were smuggled into enemy lands on black-sailed barks, spreading his creeping madness. It was the only way, Sekar maintained, that Usheran, so mercurial of soul, could be trusted to contribute to the war against the living. Nagash had not forgiven his Mortarch's past transgressions, but in his cunning, the god had found a use for him. For all of his sins, Gormain was a true believer in the Supreme One, the ultimate avatar of unstinting law. That's how Sekar had ensnared him. He was in Usheran's good graces, able to keep his sire's fractured mind away from his status as a bloodbag, and the rest of the Summercourt pliant. It had rewarded Gormain with influence, however grudgingly given. More importantly, though, it made him of purpose to his god. Even if deception rankled, and Sekar's sneering superiority made it no easier to stomach. "Sir Geryon still wars against the plague sorceress, sire," Gormain said. "Many bannermen rally to him." "Good," Usheran grunted, twitching as a blade bit deeper. "Good. And Baron Bittenback's trial continues." "Indeed, sire." More truthfully, Bittenback was currently scraps of meat in Mistress's Gristlehook's pot. The aberrant's madness had wavered long enough for him to perceive a Nulmian taking a dagger to Usheran, and presume the worst. If there was one transgression the jovial ghouls would not forgive, it was harm to their beloved king. "A sad instance," Usheran grumbled. "What say you, Lord Aberrath? How might thee proceed, should a courtier prove false?" "He is but a snake, my lord," Sekar's amiable tone betrayed none of the irritation she likely felt at her pet being addressed.
Is he?
Usheron chuckled.
Is he indeed?
Sekar's flicker of surprise was controlled, but Gormain sensed it. The bleeding ceased. Usheron wheezed, slumping into his throne. Despite himself, the sight of his sire so reduced saw Gormain wince. Then Usheron chuckled, and any sympathy was extinguished.
Another thorough raid, but for the good, if our gift spread peace and good cheer.
Take heart, my lord, Sekar nodded. Your generosity shall...
Sire!
Flopping wings echoed in a cacophony beyond an arched window. A Pegasus-riding knight barreled through the opening, skidding to a halt in the chamber's heart. Gormain blinked, but the false vision persisted, albeit growing more blurred. Only in a reflection of a pool of blood revealed the interloper's true form, a bat-winged form of Marquis Thoromir. The aberrant bowed awkwardly.
Sigmarite, sir. Moving through the mountains.
Coming to besiege us? Sekar hissed, her diplomat's tongue briefly forgotten. Gormain's stomach dropped. A barrier ringed the mountains where New Summercourt lurked, garrisoned by ivory praetorians, as dedicated to keeping enemies out as they were Usheron contained. But the peril was not in an attack. That might even have given Usheron back his taste for war. No, the danger lay in the Summer King's propensity for deranged theatrics, seeing him proclaim exactly what he did.
Hark!
Usheron roared, lurching upon his throne like a ship in a storm tide.
But these are glad tidings. Come to honor the alliance between Goodsire Nagash and Azir's Guild King. Verily, we must ready to receive them.
Hardly, Sekar spat, courtly sensibilities briefly forgotten. Brigands, flying false colours. We cannot simply open our gates.
Our gates?
Usheron had stopped shrieking. He leant forward, hunched and still, a predator scenting the wind. Dripping blood broke the smothering silence.
Surely, niece, thou meanest my gates.
There was no hint of challenge in the king's voice, yet Gormain spied Sekar's handmaidens flinch.
And didst thou not speak of my luggers? 'Twould be petty to deny succor to the needy.
Beast had her trapped. After a moment, Sekar smiled, bowing low. As ever, lord, your beneficence humbles me. Such obediences typically placated Usheron. This time he remained coiled, eyes burning dark. His gaze flickered to Gormain. A prey beast's terror thrilled up the Grand Justice's spine. Only then did the Summer King nod. He sat taller and clapped his monstrous hands.
Prepare the feast.